Today on Face the State, trouble on the tracks. It's been 2 months since the East Palestine derailment. There were new concerns about health, the long-term impact on the town, and who's holding who accountable.
We have to do things to make our trains safer.
We just want them to stop making it so political. These are people's lives. These are children. That stuff is there and it's bad.
What's being done to right the situation and the concerns today about the next group of people to be impacted. Abolishing the death penalty, it was the big talker this week at the State House. We present the arguments for and against and what must happen before anything is decided. And, well, it's almost Election Day. The deadline tomorrow and what makes this primary so different than other elections. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us here on Face the State. I'm Tracy Townsend. We begin this Sunday, April 2nd, 2 months since a Norfolk Southern train derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, igniting not only a massive fire and chemical release, but a political battle over safety along the tracks. While the investigation into the cause of the crash is still underway, there is growing concern about the effects the toxic chemicals are having on the people who live nearby and the future of the East Palestine community. The derailment also exposed gaps in railroad safety regulations and the need to train for these types of emergencies. This morning, we're exploring the fallout of the crash and the fight to hold the railroad accountable. First, let's explore where we are today. Let's start with the derailment. Nearly 50 cars derailed in the small town on Friday, February 3rd while heading to Conway, Pennsylvania. An immediate evacuation order followed. The next day, the mayor declared a state of emergency. Air quality was being monitored throughout a 1-mile zone. 2 days later, Governor Mike DeWine issues an urgent evacuation notice to anyone who had not yet left. After concerns of a potential explosion following the train derailment, officials conducted a controlled release of the chemicals, one being vinyl chloride. On February 8th, Governor Mike DeWine lifts the evacuation order. 10 days after the train derailment, NTSB points to wheel bearing failure as the suspected cause of the crash. On February 15th, the first town hall meeting was held. Norfolk Southern wasn't there. After nearly 2 weeks, DeWine requests federal help, asking CDC medical experts to move in. On February 21st, the EPA administrator goes door to door in East Palestine and made a list of demands to Norfolk Southern.
The sense of comfort that comes with living in a community like East Palestine has been shattered.
2 days later, U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg visits East Palestine. Also, the NTSB releases a preliminary report of the crash, calling it 100% preventable.
We call things accidents. There is no accident.
Erin Brockovich arrived in East Palestine and called for more answers after the train derailment. She held a town hall with residents to address their fears and frustrations. 1 week later, a second Norfolk Southern train derails in Springfield, Ohio. The railway company said there were no hazardous materials on board the train and there were no reported injuries. Norfolk Southern announced a 6-point plan to improve safety, a blueprint the rail company issued after its second train derailment. 3 days later, on March 9th, the Norfolk Southern CEO testifies in Congress, vowing to make it right in East Palestine.
We're going to be there for as long as it takes to help East Palestine thrive and recover.
But that cleanup has been stalled after several states refused to take the waste from the East Palestine derailment. Finally, on March 14th, the Ohio Attorney General sues Norfolk Southern to pay for cleanup costs and environmental damage.
This was an epic disaster, and the cleanup is going to be expensive, and it's going to take some significant dollars to put the people of East Palestine back as close as possible to the position they were before February 3rd.
Ohio Governor Mike DeWine says the disaster has revealed that railroad companies have work to do, including better training at no cost to the community for local fire departments, especially because he says about 90% of them in our state are volunteer fire departments. The governor's made multiple visits to East Palestine and is going to return in about a week for the opening of a new clinic. Governor DeWine told me in a sit-down interview that it's part of an effort to ensure residents that they are not alone in dealing with the recovery from the derailment.
We're going to officially open a new clinic in East Palestine. We're working with a local hospital there. And the idea is this will be permanent. This is not just, for 6 months or a year. And I think it's going to do a couple things. One, it's going to give people an assurance that there is a real medical presence in the community. What people tell me, even if they don't have any symptoms now, they tell me, look, I'm worried about where I'm going to be in a year, 5 years, 10 years. And so giving them a baseline when they go in now, and then that continuity of care where they have a medical home is very, very important. The only hiccup that really has occurred in getting that dirt out of there, that soil out of there. And what they did is they went in right where they removed the tracks and took that down, really down to the clay, and then piled it up. But the only real hiccup has been that for a while we had states that were saying, oh, we don't want it here. And the irony is that they were already taking stuff a lot worse than what we were sending them. And we were taking it in Ohio. It's not like we were not taking it. The bottom line is, when you deal with material like this that might be dangerous, there are specific places that are licensed by the federal government, by the U.S. EPA, that can take them.
I talked to State Senator Rulli a couple weeks ago, and he was remarking on how he feels that this has been a very bipartisan effort to help. And I wondered about your thoughts on that and the kind of cooperation, so to speak, you're getting from the Biden administration.
Yeah, look, I think we're getting good cooperation. I think everybody is on the same page now. Frankly, when I went over there shortly after it happened and decisions had to be made, I think the railroad, candidly, Norfolk Southern, was not communicating very well with us. And that was an initial problem. I think they are now. I think we've gotten over that. As far as the Biden administration, look, they had U.S. EPA was there within 2 hours after the crash. Our Ohio EPA was there, shortly after that. So we've been in there, we've been working with them. Are there glitches? Sure. But overall, it's been a bipartisan, nonpartisan, however you want to describe it, and everybody kind of gets it. We got to take care of this community, we got to help them, and we got to look to the future for that community, because this community needs to thrive.
What are some things that people in other parts of the state can learn from this in terms of what's coming through their communities?
We have to do things to make our trains safer, particularly those trains that are carrying this toxic material. Mm-hmm. And there are two bills in the United States Congress. I think both are good bills. I'm optimistic. I think we'll end up with a bill that makes some real changes. One of the changes we've talked about is every so many miles, there is something that they have in the tracks that is reading what the temperature is of that train. Well, they've got to be closer together. Also, the protocol that the train company uses needs to be uniform between the different train companies, and frankly, it needs to be set by the government, in my opinion. Once the temperature hits this point, mm-hmm. you need to shut the train down. So these are things that I think the average Ohioan, the average American never thought about until we saw this massive wreck, and then you kind of dissect it and figure out, okay, what went wrong and what do we do in the future to change that? So the bottom line is our trains can be a lot safer than they are today. Next, we need to make sure that the information about what is in that train is available to the local first responders. We had over 300 first responders respond to this train. They did not know what was in that train. They did not know what was burning. That's a problem.
Now, in addition to training, lawmakers are hoping to add some new rules in the aftermath of a derailment. While the state only has so much power to regulate railroads, as we've reported, local officials are trying to come up with some creative solutions to prevent a repeat of this disaster. However, the true power lies with Congress. There are two separate bills making their way through the House and the Senate. They're mostly the same. However, the House bill doesn't require a two-person crew like Senators J.D. Vance and Sherrod Brown have proposed. Proposed requirements would also include more detectors that watch for that overheating on the train axles. There's also funding for training first responders on hazardous materials and research for constructing safer rail cars that transport those materials. Here are the senators on their bill.
I've talked to the president. I've talked to the majority leader in the Senate. They want it as fast as possible. Senator Vance and I are rounding up Republican votes. We have every Democratic vote. I'm hoping by early summer, this is to the president's desk.
We cannot allow Norfolk Southern to contaminate the soil in East Palestine without cleaning it up. So look, all this stuff is happening slower than I would like it to happen. That's why people like me have to stay on top of the relevant authorities, the companies, to make sure that people aren't being left behind.
On Tuesday, members of the U.S. House held a hearing drilling experts about the environmental response in East Palestine. Here were the major concerns. First, the slow efforts to clean up the toxic soil from the crash site. While some of it has been cleaned up, some still remains. Lawmakers also pressed the members of the EPA about weekly testing being done with the water and the soil. They say still no toxic levels have been found in either the soil or the water.
Residents of the greater East Palestine community are not alone. EPA will continue to be with them for as long as it takes to ensure their health and safety. Working within the Unified Command, EPA has more than 80 personnel on site.
Lawmakers also expressed concerns about why the company behind the derailment, Norfolk Southern, wasn't invited to the hearing. Representative Bill Johnson, who you see there, also noted there will be a time to address railroad safety. He asked Congress to consider bipartisan rail safety legislation he introduced to help keep what happened in East Palestine from happening again. The EPA identified 5 chemicals at the derailment site. First, the most talked about is vinyl chloride. It is a known carcinogen, a colorless and flammable gas that is used to produce PVC products. Scientists have also found butyl acrylate, which is described as a strong-smelling liquid used to make plastics, polymers, and resins. And then isobutylene, another gas that is used to make plastics. Finally, ethylene glycol and ethyl hexyl acrylate, liquids also used to make different plastics, paints, and even antifreeze. All of the chemicals can irritate the skin and the eyes, as well as cause a sore throat and nausea. The long-term impact of the spill will in part depend on the efficiency and effectiveness of the cleanup. It's estimated to take 3 months to complete. Crews are digging out that contaminated soil and removing pollutants from the water. There's also a massive operation to remove the soil from the site and then dispose of it in areas around the country. Some 23,000 tons remain. Attorney General Dave Yost says Norfolk Southern has committed to hiring Ohio companies and Ohio workers to do all future repairs in East Palestine. He did ask the company if they would commit to hiring Ohioans to do the work, and they agreed. Yost says this agreement has no bearing on the lawsuit he has filed against the company.
The money they're spending right now is money that they're ordered to do by the administrative order. Our lawsuit involves things that are longer term and frankly, damages to the environment, damages to the economy that won't even be tallied up for another year or two or even longer.
Norfolk Southern did not attend the news conference on Wednesday, but the CEO and president, Alan Shaw, issued a statement saying, in part, recover and thrive. We look forward to supporting local businesses. So we'll have more on that. We'll be following that through the next few weeks. Regardless of the cleanup effort that's underway, it's still unknown what the people who live in the town will experience in the years to come. We have not yet learned the level of exposure or the future impact that those chemicals will have on their health. Scientists say they simply don't know what happens to people who are exposed to this kind of combination of chemicals. The state does have a health office set up for residents to get treatment. The governor announced last week it would remain open indefinitely. Still, in this tight-knit town, there is some skepticism about what they're hearing.
I just don't trust their results. We're all ending up sick and they're telling us it's safe and everything's at a safe level. Then why are we all sick?
We want to keep this in the forefront of the news because they still don't have independent testing. And I believe that that's what we need.
When authorities conducted a controlled burn, it was like a bomb went off. A bomb containing vinyl chloride, which releases dangerous chemicals. When burned, these chemicals never go away. Chemicals such as dioxins, which are not safe at any level and cause damage that may not show up for years. 2 days later, our government told us it was safe to come home. But is it safe?
There is also a push to establish a fund to take care of the needs of more than 300 first responders who went to that crash site. The heat and the chemicals from that fire ruined many of the firefighters' gear. And while some wore breathing masks to protect themselves from the fumes, others didn't have or didn't know they needed them to protect their lungs. In the next 2 weeks, the health department is preparing to offer testing and exams to those folks. The state says it's just the start in what's going to be a long-term effort to monitor the health of the emergency responders who rushed to East Palestine. Already, some 200 have signed up for that testing. There is much more we can expect in the coming months. We've dedicated time to covering the aftermath of the derailment right here on Face the State. We will continue to do that. There is much more ahead this Sunday morning, including the alarming rates of colon cancer among young people. Also ahead, the First Lady makes a visit to our state, what she plans to do for members and families in the Air Force. And there's a new push to kill the death penalty in Ohio, but does it have enough support to pass? The arguments happening at the State House and the growing support this morning. And younger cops on the streets, police age limits could be dropped. The mayor on that proposal. Can it help with fighting crime and filling the ranks? Plus, the other big bills making their way through the State House and the big deadline tomorrow when Face the State returns on this Sunday, April 2nd. Welcome back. First Lady Jill Biden was in Ohio Wednesday as part of her Joining Forces initiative. Dr. Biden made a stop at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Greene County, Ohio. She met with military families and toured a local elementary school supporting military-connected children. She is touting a local Purple Star elementary school that supports military-connected kids, and she also hosted a session with military parents highlighting the president's investments toward military and veteran families, caregivers, and survivors in his fiscal year 2024. More people are at risk for colorectal cancer, including younger people. We're talking Gen X, Y, and Z. Researchers say the reasons range from sedentary lifestyles, more time commuting, and working at desks in front of computers, and diets that include too much red meat and processed food and not enough fiber. The American Cancer Society just released a study showing that about 20,000 people in the U.S. under the age of 50 will be diagnosed with colorectal cancer this year. Estimates show that more than 3,700 young adults will die.
We give you medications through your IV that get you very sleepy and comfortable. Far and wide, my patients say they don't even remember the procedure. And it's great after, and I always say that when you do the colonoscopy, you find no polyps. We say, all right, we'll see you in 10 years. But I would say just as great is if we do the colonoscopy, we find some polyps, remove them before they have the chance to potentially become cancer down the line.
We just came out of Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month in March, but it's important to know the early symptoms, including blood in your stool, a change in bowel habits, weight loss for no known reason. All of those things, you need to know that year round. Talk with your doctor about screening. Age 45 is the age, but knowing your family history is important because you may in fact need to get screened earlier. All right, are 18-year-olds mature enough to be police officers? The pushback on some proposed legislation related to that.
We must end this unjust practice as soon as we can.
And the bipartisan push to abolish the death penalty, why supporters believe this is the time to do it. Ohio lawmakers from both sides of the aisle are trying to end the death penalty in our state. This week, a bipartisan group of senators introduced legislation. They say because of recent exonerations and changing beliefs, they believe there is a good chance it will pass.
We must end this unjust practice as soon as we can. Life is sacred, like my colleague said, and the death penalty fails to treat human lives as such.
I believe that as a devout Catholic, the death penalty is wrong based on there should be one being that decides if you live or die, and that's the Lord, and it's not a judge.
But there is opposition to the bill. Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost told 10 TV, Ohio's death penalty is a broken promise of justice, and it must be fixed. This discussion has been a long time coming, so let's have it now. If Ohio chooses to end capital punishment, let it own the decision in the full light of day. I will stand on the other side with the families of the slain. Again, that is from a statement from Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost. Governor DeWine previously issued a moratorium on executions in January of 2019. There hasn't been an execution in the state since 2018. Yes, we are already coming up on the primary election this year. We'll talk about that. It's a month away this Tuesday. Also this week, State Senate considering a bill addressing the challenges of recruiting police officers. Now, this bill would lower the minimum age from 21 to 18, and it's designed to help with hiring officers for the large number of vacancies within many departments. Several reports addressing the issue of young officers show there is some support. One officer in Pataskala says he knew he wanted to be in law enforcement, and this just helped him get there sooner. There are, though, concerns about the maturity of 18-year-olds and whether they're ready for this job. Columbus Mayor Andrew Ginther had this to say in a recent interview.
You know, I'm torn. I'm interested in the conversation. I do believe that, with a certain amount of age comes a certain level of maturity. And I think about the difference between an 18-year-old, a 21-year-old, a 25-year-old. I mean, we give officers incredible power. Mayors, governors, and presidents do not have the power to stop somebody, to question somebody, to take away their freedom, and ultimately take away their life. That's a huge amount of power.
Last week's full interview with the mayor is on our digital streaming channel, 10 TV Plus. You can hear Mayor Ginther's plan to tackle crime in Columbus and why he says he believes a new hire will make a difference. You can search for last week's show. Finally this morning, Decision 2023. We are already coming up on the primary election this year, a month away this Tuesday. We are looking at that, and we want to make sure that you know the primary is going to be different for one main reason. This week, new voter ID requirements took effect in our state. Voters must have a state-issued photo ID and no longer have the option of using a bank statement or even bills as proof of address. The change has been criticized for its impact on low-income Ohioans.
938,000 voting-age Ohioans lack a driver's license or state ID. Imposing extra costs like these on the voting process inevitably impacts marginalized voters the most. The driver's license costs, on average, $37.63. If you think about that, that's 4 hours worth of work at the average state minimum wage. Getting your birth certificate online,
Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose says a poll taken in 2021 shows a majority of Americans support photo ID requirements to ensure fair elections. Now, if you aren't registered to vote, there really isn't a whole lot of time to do that. The deadline to register to vote in the May primary is tomorrow, April 3rd. If you're voting by absentee ballot, you must request it by April 25th. The primary is set for May 2nd. So you have a lot of work to do if you plan to vote. We thank you for being here with us on Face the State today, and we wish you a great week.